A new season brought forth by a new year. What new dangers, what new knowledges, what discoveries, and what stories will we uncover? For all of these and more can be found here at the Lair of OmnusI in this, our third season. Ladies and gentlemen, I am OmnusI. You are here with me in the Lair of OmnusI, and today is the 4th of May. May the 4th be with you! A day to celebrate Star Wars and all the great things that Star Wars has brought to all of us. Now, of course, we're here in the Lair of OmnusI, which means that, aside from all the plushies and toys and goodness knows what else that Star Wars has brought to my life, of course, we're going to talk about the role-playing games, because that's what we're here for. So, in my personal instance, I can tell you right now, I love Star Wars. Unequivocally, I love Star Wars. Does that mean that I love everything about Star Wars? No. Does that mean that I love every character, every decision that the people who own Star Wars and have directed Star Wars in has ever done? No, and I don't think anybody really loves everything. Some bone will stick in anyone's craw about Star Wars, but I think in general, people who consider themselves Star Wars fans love Star Wars in general, and I think it's fine to say that. Star Wars is a universe of potential, of possibility, with a very interesting framework that basically says a small little kernel of hope can exist even when everything else in the universe is at its most bleak. And that's certainly a theme that's been played around with, not just in Star Wars, but plenty of other intellectual properties, lots of other stories, and certainly has a home for us in our role-playing games. Now, I, of course, have played Star Wars games before and told my own stories. I say I have spent far more time thinking about the universe that doesn't exist in cinema, or in book form, or on TV, by far than I have actually watching the movies, or watching the TV shows, or reading the books. Unless, of course, you were counting those books as being the Star Wars role-playing game books. But, as far as Star Wars goes, I consider myself to be a fan. Now, some people might have a problem with me considering myself to be a fan, because I will be the first to admit, I haven't seen everything Star Wars. I'm not the greatest consumer of Star Wars. As a matter of fact, I haven't even seen the last 2 movies. I didn't see The Last Jedi, and I didn't see Rise of Skywalker. Not because I haven't had the opportunity to, and I really, really probably should. It's just I can't find the time to prioritize towards watching the movies. I'm just not that into them anymore as far as the cinematic universe goes. I haven't seen Solo. I haven't seen Rogue One, even though I own it in Blu-ray. And I don't really think I'm going to end up watching The Bad Bunch, which is coming out on Disney. And I'm really kind of happy to see that they're putting out more movies or TV shows, streaming shows, however you want to call it, in the vein of the Clone Wars cartoon series, because I thought that was an arresting artistic style and allowed them to play around with the characters without committing to a major movie. The what if, or what happened in between this point to this point, this bridge actually told really good stories themselves and helped to flesh out characters that weren't the best fleshed out by the cinematic releases. So, honestly, I'm sure it'll be great. I don't see myself watching it. I really don't see that changing. Someday, yeah, I will watch The Last Jedi. I will watch Rise of Skywalker. I have no reason not to watch Rogue One. And I think Solo looked fun, but I don't watch a great deal of movies, and Star Wars has not been my priority. Now, you might think to yourself, well, how can you say you're a fan if you don't really like it? And in general, I will say, I like Star Wars and the idea behind Star Wars. I like the idea that it's a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It's this idea that people and aliens exist side by side. It's the feeling that there's a universe of conflict, that there's brilliant items of technology that are out there that people can play around with. The science doesn't make a great deal of sense, but it doesn't have to. It's a movie, and a certain amount of suspension of disbelief is handy. I'm even fine with the idea of Jedi and Jedi Knights. I don't mind a little magic in my sci-fi. Doesn't break my heart at all. I think the Jedi are a cool concept that have been cloned and parroted any number of times. Anybody who's interested in playing the Mystic Knights from Rifts will know what I'm talking about. But I think in general, the idea of this philosophical order that also turns out to be the biggest badasses in the galaxy, yeah, that's not a bad idea. And also watching their rise and fall was kind of interesting. As a matter of fact, people who really don't like the prequels could at least appreciate the idea that we were watching something with a lot of Jedi, and the Jedi were, even when they weren't human, they were human. They could make mistakes, they were fallible, and boy, were they. So, yeah, all told, I have seen the first 3 movies, episodes 4, 5, and 6, several times. I have seen the prequels at least 2 or 3 times. And I have seen The Force Awakens, which I thought was a pretty good remake of the episode 4. Story paralleled so much that it was basically a remake for a new generation. And I was fine with that. I didn't really have a terrible problem with it. Obviously there were some irritations along the way, some things that just kind of stuck in your craw a little bit, but again, I didn't have a terrible problem with it. I thought it was pretty well done. So, when I'm thinking about Star Wars, though, I'm thinking about the universe. I'm thinking about X-Wings and light freighters and huge monolithic capital ships and technology that can destroy planets and a small cell of people who are fighting against a monolithic tyranny and eventually can manage to upset it. It's the ultimate little guys that have right on their side and have a chance to win. And I really have a hard time taking that out of my perception of Star Wars. Even if you want to concentrate on a story that's about smaller people within that universe, like Solo, a much loved character, but this isn't a story about him triumphing over great evil. It's more of a story about how he got to be where he was, from everything I've heard. And maybe it didn't blow down the doors at the box office, but it's Disney's right to explore those nooks and crannies of the universe. But when I think Star Wars, I think, like I think a lot of people do, it's an idea of conflict. Hence wars and space, sure. But I also generally like to think that it's a story about people and how they deal with war and how they deal with a galactic society. Now, I have not played the Fantasy Flight Star Wars role-playing games. So, Edge of the Empire or Scum and Villainy, or I haven't played those. So I've heard they're very good narrative games, but I haven't played them, so I can't really talk on those. I have probably spent about 2/3 of my gaming career involving Star Wars with West End's Star Wars the role-playing game. And this particular game basically has all the tools to tell any kind of Star Wars story you want. There's numerous expansions to it, so if you want to go, say, Old Republic, where there's lots of Jedi around, and it's a different time when, pretty much the prototypical time when the Sith attack, you can do that. It's not terribly challenging to set that up. You just need the amount of lore appropriate to your encounter, and you're golden. If you want to tell a tale in the Rebellion era, yeah, all the stuff there is the default for that in the very first versions of this game, and there's plenty of supporting material for it, from the aliens that you might commonly see, like the Mount Calamari, or the Celestins, or the Ithorians, or Wookiees, of course, even Ewoks, for people who like that, are there in the game, and, pretty capably placed so that one race isn't overwhelmingly more powerful. The balance is pretty decent, although it's going to take quite an exceptional human to outbox a Wookiee. They have, huge advantages there, but by and large, it was a solid enough game, and I spent probably 2/3 of my Star Wars role-playing career playing that particular game. The last 1/3 of my Star Wars role-playing experience has been with the D20 system of Star Wars, which Wizards of the Coast put out. It was fueled by the same notions as, of course, Dungeons and Dragons. It was a class-based system. It used a leveling system, fairly familiar to anybody who's ever really played Dungeons and Dragons, with some significant changes to it. Introducing a vitality system versus a wound system for the hit points, in which vitality was a resource you would expend out if you were a Jedi. Using your force powers would actually deplete your vitality, which was a thing that happened. So there were some interesting mechanics in both systems. But, as I said, I really think that Star Wars comes down to the characters that are involved, the exciting people that make up the Star Wars universe. So, without really passing judgment one way or the other, because I don't feel that I have to in this case, if you like Star Wars, there's a role-playing game out there for you. If you don't like the leveling system of the D20s, hey, this one works pretty well. If you like one with trees and growth and plans and the ability to add on abilities a la carte, I hear the Fantasy Flight games are great. But I'm here mostly to talk about two characters that I've played, one from each system. And just, to kind of give you an idea of some of the adventures and excitement. Actually, I'm going to do 3, but 2 of them are from the West End Games version. Since they're getting 2, I'm going to let the D20 system go first. My character, and I've really played only one character for the D20 system. It was a longer campaign, and while I've had a few lesser characters in other D20 Star Wars games, there's really only one that comes to mind. His name was Lauren Savath. We were playing in a game where the game master said, we're going to be playing an all-Jedi game. Everybody's a Jedi. You're all Padawans. And this is before Order 66 came about, where the Clone Army turned on the Jedi and wiped them out. So right now the Jedi are still on top, and the Republic Army is grappling with the Separatists, and you're cool. One of the flies in the ointment, one of the players did not want to play a Jedi. No matter what, they did not want any of that. So what did they do? They chose to play a clone trooper instead. Here we learn one of the biggest problems with the D20 system. If you're not a Jedi and there are a Jedi in it, you're going to suck. You can be awesome. You can do all the cool things. You can get guns. You can get gear. You can do stuff. And you're going to spend a lot of time watching the Jedi do what the Jedi do, because, quite honestly, it's like a spellcaster in D&D in its own way. The Jedi are going to keep accumulating different powers that are going to let them do cooler and cooler things, and their cooler things are eventually outstripping the bonuses that you get for your stuff. So, our poor clone trooper was left behind so many times simply because he just couldn't keep up. He couldn't do the kind of things that our Jedi characters could do. In hand-to-hand combat, what was he going to do? Whip out the vibroblade? And we're all whipping out lightsabers. Not real fair. When volleys of blaster bolts are flying at us, we're blocking them. He's at best diving for cover, at best. So, and when it comes to, getting from point A to point B, yeah, you better use that jetpack skill, because otherwise you're going to watch us do these super leaps, or we're going to have to levitate you across very ingloriously. So, yeah, if you're all Jedi except for one person, that one person is going to be your torchbearer, basically. Which wasn't fair, because he was cool in his own way, and the Game Master kept trying to get him better and cooler guns to keep up with us, and it just didn't work. That player was fairly long-suffering through that entire campaign, and it wasn't anything that we did, it's just we're Jedi, we can't help being cool. Now, as I usually do, Lauren was a support character. He was a healer. And quite honestly, just like a cleric, it's hard to believe unless you are having fairly light encounters that don't require a lot of risk of grisly wounds, since there is a wound system, unless you have ways of healing it relatively quickly, somebody dedicating themselves to using med packs and saving lives, it can be pretty brutal at times, especially if the Game Master really wants to let fly with some of the more nasty creatures or NPCs in the game. However, if you've got 4 Jedi that are fighting, you have to ramp things up. You don't have a choice. Those lightsabers are lethal, and even if the character is pretty milquetoast, and that's pretty much a good description of Lauren, he was really quick, but he was not strong and not the greatest of constitutions. So, but he was very wise, very powerful in the Force. He started out as a Jedi consular. So he preferred to talk rather than pull out the lightsaber. As a matter of fact, he didn't want to kill anybody. He actually got yelled at by his master for trying to argue for, since there were training lightsabers that didn't do lethal damage, the possibility extended that perhaps lightsabers could be given a stun setting. So in those times when you wanted to take somebody down, you wanted to use your skills where you have been dedicating your life in lightsaber combat, and you don't feel the need to kill an opponent. Put a stun setting on it. Wouldn't really drastically break the lightsaber. It wouldn't revolutionize them because you already have them in training sabers for the Padawans. Nope. This is heresy! And I got roundly chewed out for it. So it went. Now, the others, of course, were Jedi Sentinels, who are the warrior types. And being based on 3rd edition D20, there are prestige classes. Oh yeah. We had a number of the extra books and things. So, of course, the Jedi Healer is actually a prestige class, which my character just naturally slotted into, which allowed me to just wave my hand and make a lot of injuries just go away. Quite honestly, my character ended up becoming more of a magic user type character because on top of the healing, he also learned fun things like Force Light, which is basically like a fireball to Darksiders. It could damage Darkside entities, possibly even excommunicating them, just which really took care of some of our problems. When we got attacked by a Darkside ghost, my character just stepped up and said, "No, no. Look, my power can do this." "Oh, yeah, it can." Ooh. Lauren was an interesting character. A lot of Jedi characters are usually fairly one-dimensional. For example, you take Anakin Skywalker. Anakin is brave, he is arrogant, he is single-minded, he is stubborn. We all know somebody like that, probably. But when he commits to something, he commits wholeheartedly, and he is very emotional, something that the Jedi are supposed to value and not being emotional. He was, very much so. Throwing temper tantrums, being a whiny little, well, you know. In the movies, Anakin comes off as being very immature and childish, even when they grant him the position of Jedi Knight. He throws tantrums, he shows that he has no inner peace, and for a monastic order like the Jedi, it's really stunning that plot armor got him as far as he did. It's really hard to believe that he would ever have made it past Padawan for as childish as he behaved many of the times. Let alone if they found out about the Sand People massacre. It's okay, buddy. It's okay. But Anakin had some serious flaws. In the end, his character was all about flaw. It really had relatively little to do about how brave he was or how accomplished as a knight he was. It took the Clone Wars cartoon to really fill that in. But the movies were all about his weakness, his emotions that clouded his mind. And if you ever needed a blueprint why the Jedi way of emptying yourself of emotions was a good idea, well, Anakin kind of highlighted all the dangers of not doing that. You have a hard time believing that he could be really objective in just about anything. Certainly not a wise Jedi Master. So, in the end, Lauren was a kind of a complex character. He was a Jedi, and he did believe that most of the Jedi principles were correct. He did avoid falling in love as much as he could. He did avoid, for the most part, being afraid, and he accepted his fate fairly well. But when the Jedi Order fell apart, which it did, our clone trooper didn't get Executive Order 66. He was free-willed enough to not kill us, or try to. He wouldn't have done very well. Our Sentinels would have just shredded him. He might have killed my character off, though, because my character was kind of feeble. As a matter of fact, the Game Master kind of celebrated that because a few circumstances came up where my character actually had to fight. I didn't have a choice, and he did okay. With having a high dexterity, he was relatively hard to hit, and he could hit fairly often. So, all in all, he wasn't bad. He had his yellow-bladed lightsaber, and I can't tell you any great combat things that he did. I mean, he stood up to a Darksider in combat, and he had to be bailed out by the Sentinels, including we had one Alpha who was a Sentinel who was incredible in lightsaber combat. He completely blew the curve, which meant he had to have his own separate challenges. It wasn't that the player power gamed it. No, yeah, it was. He totally power gamed it. But my character was all about the more esoteric stuff. He was more about learning the skills, and Consulars had more skills than Sentinels did. Sentinels concentrated in lightsaber combat, and my character concentrated in diplomacy and philosophy and medicine and a lot of other areas. But with Lauren, I was willing to let him make some mistakes that would have held him back from being considered a Jedi Knight. For instance, when we were dispatched as Padawans, we were kind of surprised when we were actually put in charge of jobs that, is there a knight coming with us? One of our masters? No. They're all fighting a war against the Separatists, but the Jedi still need to do something, and you're it. Oh, okay. And I was assured that was how it is in the universe. The temple would send out Padawans to do the jobs of actual knights when there weren't enough knights spread around to do things. Okay, this couldn't possibly blow up in our faces. So we ended up facing some pretty nasty challenges that, again, a Jedi Master probably could have handled, a Jedi Knight with some trouble. We did it because we had 4 of us and a clone trooper. So the certain circumstances oftentimes led to us fighting something and lightsabering it to death. Nothing terribly complicated for the most part. The Game Master really didn't go with a lot of moral choices and dilemmas for us. But, a couple of the Jedi philosophy things were kind of hard to deal with. For example, my character ended up with a blaster. And you might think, Jedi with a blaster? That's kind of odd. Yeah, my character thought so too. I'm really dexterous. Why won't you let me shoot people? Blasters have a stun setting. I can end an entire fight by going, pew! You're down. Pew! You're down. I rarely miss, and the stun setting wasn't a bad notion. You had pretty good odds of dropping a foe if you hit them with it. And if you have to kill somebody, it's easier to do it from a distance. Wouldn't put myself in as much risk. I didn't have the kind of endurance to take shots like the Sentinels did, so yeah, I got reamed out for that one. So when the Jedi Order fell apart, Lauren kept a blaster. And it came in handy, too, because all the others with their lightsabers ended up trying to convince other people that they're not Jedi in certain circumstances. I was actually carrying a blaster, which made me a lot more credible as not being a Jedi. Jedis don't use blasters, so you're cool. Awesome. Another thing was that Lauren did get a dark side point here or there, which I'm often accused of playing really lily white characters that never make any mistakes. Sometimes I willingly do so, and that'll come out in another one of the characters I'm going to talk about next. But occasionally the Game Master was a little bit silly in handing out dark side points. The dark side point that he got at one point, we went to a Wild West world, and we ended up with these cool Bantha Hide dusters. Cool, right? Well, we were fighting somebody, and they had a flame projector, which put my duster on fire. So, my character, rather than whipping out his lightsaber and eviscerating him, I took off my duster and beat him with the flaming duster. Dark side point. Why? because you were angry that he was burning your duster, so that's why you did it. That's a kind of rough interpretation of it. It happened to be a weapon that's at hand. It was burning anyhow, so in the act of putting it out by beating it, I'm beating it on my opponent. Nope, dark side point. Eventually, he worked it off. You could work off dark side points by exemplary do-goodingness and basically begging your game master, so it really didn't hurt me any. But as far as, considering if the Jedi Order was still fine, that dark side point would have been enough for the Masters to go, I don't think you're ready to be a knight yet. Even though my character was climbing and climbing. I believe the arbitrary level in which you're judged to be a knight in that game was 7th level. So plenty of time to be a Padawan and experiment a bit. And we played that game for quite a while. I kept everybody alive with my healing powers, from the clone trooper taking shots to the sentinels being a little bit stubborn. Lightsaber brain, that's kind of how it turned out. Which again is one of those things that makes the idea of the Jedi Order kind of a little odd. They're peacekeepers, but what are they known for? Their weapons. But yeah, Lorne was a fun character. He, in the midst of a fairly stock story with a betrayal theme baked into it and the hardships of young, not fully trained Padawans who are stuck in an empire that's hating them and hunting them down, we did what we could. It was okay. Then the Game Master moved away and the game ended prematurely. But that's how that went. That was my experiences with the D20 system. I did not care for it as much because with the D20 system, you are draining yourself to use your force powers. How often do you see in any of the movies the characters who are, using the force powers look like they're significantly fatiguing themselves? Outside of Luke, who's in training on Dagobah, I can't think of very many. Not too many at all. It's almost like they are so in tune that they use the force without draining their own personal resources. So after a reasonable fight, you're, even against something that's not terribly difficult, your character can be wiped out way in excess of other characters who only sustain damage to their fatigue, and therefore will recover a lot faster than your Jedis will, who drain themselves out by using the Force as well. It's a weird mechanic. Not terribly bad. I've heard the good news about the Fantasy Flight games not doing that, using your dice roll to determine what the Force's ebb and flow mean for you at a given moment. But yeah, it's a different system, and I have yet to really experience it. Looking forward to good times for that in the future. So I'm going to wrap this up by talking briefly about two characters, some of the most memorable times I've had in Star Wars games. And this is again using the West End Star Wars, the role-playing game, which was the D6 based system. Now, I couldn't tell you if it was the first edition or I think we were playing second edition at the time. But the two characters I'm going to talk about, one was named Tombstone and the other one was named Lachem Chabash. So Tombstone was an outlaw, and I made him after another character of mine died. Death wasn't actually too hard to get to in Star Wars. We sometimes ran afoul of some pretty nasty stuff. I believe my prior character had died due to a thermal detonator, which can happen. And I decided I was going to make the hardest character I could, without being obvious about it. I wasn't going to make a bounty hunter. I wasn't going to make a merc. I wasn't going to make a Wookiee. I took an outlaw. Now, outlaws are interesting because they've got really high dexterity, so they're good with the blasters, good with the dodge, ostensibly. And their physical stat, I think their strength is pretty good too. The rest of them, not great. But my character wanted to be so focused on killing things. Basically to get the Empire back for what they did. I had a fairly primitive story based on, well, the Empire did something and as a result my family all died, so I'm going to get revenge. And I've been chased off planet and eventually was captured by the Empire. So the adventure that the players found me in, they were going after a crippled and floating Star Destroyer that they were hoping to salvage for the Rebellion. If they could get it repaired, that means the Rebel fleet now has a Star Destroyer. that would have been a big game changer in a lot of fights, no doubt. Of course, the Rebellion would have had to retrofit a lot of it. They would have had to, wipe out the TIE fighter racks, put in hangar spots for, their ships, and, there would have been a lot of work. It would have been a huge money dump, quite honestly, and probably not the most practical thing. But honestly, Star Destroyers are really freaking cool, and we wanted it so badly. I think anybody who ever gets on a hostile ship really just wants to hijack it. And they did. They certainly did. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to get the engines running so that they could get it moving. Maybe not the warp engines, but enough subspace so they could get it away from where the Empire last knew where it was, so that hopefully they could find a way to make it go away. And secrete it someplace where they could either strip it of all of its weapons, which it still had all those turbo lasers, it still had all those laser cannons, it still had all those missiles, it had a number of TIE fighter rag, which could have been salvaged for things the Rebellion could have used. Would the Rebellion have used TIE fighters? Maybe. If they were desperate, they would have thought about it. So, and also the Stormtrooper complement and Imperial Marine complements were wiped out. All that was really left were crew. Non-combatant crew, mostly. So when the players arrived, they took over the ship in relatively short order, and they found me in jail. I hadn't been executed yet. Not sure why. But they found me, and they're like, well, you don't like the Empire? We don't like the Empire. We have about 2,000 non-combatants that we have to have watched. We can't just let them run around. And if we lock the place down, they probably will have some guy who's a computer genius who can get them free. We can't afford that. We could get out of just about anywhere on this ship, so we have to assume they can. My character's like, sure, I'll watch them. So we put them in an airlock. And the rest of the group went off to go and do engine stuff. Fix the engines up. Fix the command up. So that they could move the ship. My character got on the intercom into the airlock. Every one of you has worked willingly for the Empire for your careers. You have been complicit in all of the actions that the Empire has done to the countless lives they have snuffed out in the galaxy. You may not have pulled the trigger, but every one of you is just as guilty. I sentence you to death. Hit the force field that kept the hard void out from the airlock, and they all got sucked out into space. Every single one of them died. Horribly from explosive decompression. I had 2 dark side points inside the first 2 hours of gameplay. Yeah, and I never got rid of those either. He was on the edge. There's no doubt about it. Throughout the whole thing, though, there were a couple of things that were fairly memorable about him. Number one was his combat doctrine. He had a heavy blaster pistol, and he was really good with it. He also got a thermal detonator really early. So, he basically set it up, which is relatively easy to do. He put the thermal detonator on a 20-second timer. And what he would do is, he would turn it to the armed position, so that the countdown was going, and he'd have it so that anybody in front of him could see the countdown, and he would have his heavy blaster pistol in the other hand taking headshots. Headshots knocked one die off of a foe's soak roll, so it took a already fairly nasty weapon and a heavy blaster pistol and made it really hard to recover from shots for it. So a headshot from a heavy blaster pistol, even if you're wearing a protective helmet, and even against stormtroopers wearing armor, still had a pretty good chance of putting somebody down. So he would just walk forward, not dodging, never dodged, except circumstances like a ship is incoming and you have to get out of the way or you'll die. Well, then I did scramble out of the way. But for the most part, I didn't. I just walked forward and when the timer got down to about 3 seconds, I would stop it, reset, arm. So it's constantly going on a timer. The story was fairly simple. You shoot me, this goes off and kills you. Because if I was shooting at you, you were probably already inside the range of a thermal detonator. So most people had a healthier respect for those things. So I caused more opponents to run away, convinced that my character was crazy, and he was. Oh, he was. So that was Tombstone's kind of calling card. Eventually, he upgraded himself and he got better weaponry and I think he ended up getting an ion pistol that was pretty nasty. He got an exoskeletal armor. Really didn't provide much armor, which he could have used. He got some good protection in the end, but he had this exoskeleton that gave him extra strength. So one time while we were fighting, we came across an Imperial scientist. He grabbed him by the throat, lifted him up, and used him as a human shield. Pew, headshot, 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 headshot. And then finally, when there were no more headshots to be had, just crushed his trachea and threw him away. He was not a nice guy. That was another dark side point. Didn't get him over to the dark side, but yeah, those were the 3 dark side points that he got. In the end, the irony of this whole thing is that he got, with that particular group, we had 2 separate groups. Our group had grown huge back in college. And we kept filtering in new people into the group. And one of and we also changed game masters too. So I had a chance to run a game for them, but I played more than I ran, which is kind of by design. And one of the persons who came over was a musician. So he came up with a music-themed adventure where we were disguised as a rock music group known as Hammerhead's Half-Brother. Good times to be had. Definitely, I would never have thought of this particular bit of insanity. My character ended up playing the piano. And there's a bunch of entertaining Star Wars musical instruments. Many of them come from the cantina. One of the players ended up playing something called a jizzwailer. Yeah, look it up. That's a Star Wars instrument. And jizz is a particular type of music. Basically, it's like jazz. So, yeah, but it's more Star Wars when it's jizz. So our Wookiee played the drums, and we had a successful adventure. We even wrote some music. Okay, I wrote a couple of songs. They were all horrible, depressing songs, but all of our songs were very anti-imperial. I remember one of the players was proud of coming up with one called Emperor's Whipping Boy about Darth Vader. If you ever get a chance in the D20 games and all of that, if you play that, or if you play the Fantasy Flight, still try to get your hands on the Guide to the Outer Rim for the D6 system. Oh my gosh, the stuff about culture outside of the Rebellion, Empire, conflict. Some of the stuff that was out in the Outer Rim is just crazy. It's so much fun. They have Star Wars-y drinks, what bars and cantinas are like, all kinds of really cool stuff about culture. So that was a lot of fun. So that was Tombstone. Now, Lakham Chobash was the other character that I'm going to talk about. He was a chaotic Jedi. Not chaotic, although that certainly did apply several times. But chaotic is in Don Quixote, the Spanish hero of sorts. Fun character from literature where Don Quixote imagined the world around him as being this great adventure all the time, and he was delusional, to say the least. He had a henchman, Pancho Sanza, who followed him around and basically kept him from killing himself. But if you've ever heard the expression tilting at windmills, yeah, that's when he got on a horse, took a lance, and actually charged at a windmill, thinking it was a dragon, I believe it was. So anyhow, the chaotic character is somebody who is divorced of reality and living in a fantasy world, and really believing in it. So my chaotic Jedi could sense the Force and was convinced that he was a Jedi, but he was not. So it takes all kinds. So he was my comedy character. Now, when the players first found him, because there was an origin story to this particular group, he was on a sanatorium ship where they're taking crazies to go and get treatment or to be put onto a planet for crazy people or what have you. But he was seen as dangerously insane. He was a noble son, but he was so obsessed with being a Jedi, even when the Jedi were cast out by the Empire, and there weren't any Jedi left, so we thought, he was convinced he was. So he was put on this ship basically for his own protection rather than just executed for being a crazy. And the party found him. When they found him, because they attacked the ship, not knowing, I believe, that it was full of crazies, they found me on the bridge. I had escaped from my cell, And I was in the bridge, wearing a bathrobe, having a fencing foil. I took the tip off, so it was kind of dangerous. My character knew how to sword fight. And a flashlight, basically. A glow stick, but you get the idea. A Star Wars flashlight. And profess myself as Jedi Master Lakham Chobash, which they all went, huh? And always had a pithy quip about the way eating too much for your supper is not the way of the Force. It is the way to an expanding stomach and having to buy a new wardrobe. Things like that. Constantly pointing these out. There's only a couple of things that really made him all that memorable. We played for a little while, and one of the other characters that we were playing with was a squib. A squib is a small blue person, generally seen as a race to be the Kender of Star Wars. They're kleptomaniacs and they're obsessive tinkers. He got a hold of my flashlight and put a blaster charge in it so that it could be used as a one-shot blaster. I did not know this. He put it right back. So at one point, we were facing down Imperial Customs. My character, of course, well, sirrah, I would advise you to let us go because I am a Jedi Master, and I don't want to hurt you. He's like, you're not a Jedi, you're just a loony in a bathrobe. And my character's like, well, perhaps you'll think otherwise when you witness the weapon of a Jedi Knight, and I had my flashlight out. And he's like, oh, do tell. Oh, you have a lightsaber. Oh, get the stormtroopers. I'm like, all right. You are quite insane, but unfortunately I must do this. Caught him right in his face and he died. My character didn't expect that, but he went with it. Because, yeah. All right, well, the powers of the Force are truly mysterious, my friends. Apparently I've got to get the flux actuator fixed so that it doesn't project quite as long of a beam. And they're like, ah, ha, ha, ha. The squib reloaded it afterward. So that was funny. My character didn't have a blaster skill either, so it was a default roll. I rolled well. He failed his soak roll, and that was how that happened. But when my character was on the group ship, because we always had a group ship, one of the things I remember about Lakham was just coming up with different weird things to do. And at one point, he decided to go without clothing. When he was asked about this, he said, nudity is the closest one can get to being one with the Force. So clothing was an impediment. Also in our group was a kind of a new age Gamorrean pacifist. Don't ask, it's another one of those silly classes that they just included for whatever reason, mostly for laughs, I think. And he started seeing my character as a guru. And maybe even a spiritual advisor, because he took off his clothes and decided frolicking naked was perfectly natural and exactly the right thing to do while you're on your ship. This terrified the squib. He hid out in the ventilation ducts from that point on, and also very badly confused the astromech unit, who was also a PC. Brilliant at what he did. Completely useless in other things like combat, but that was very much that player character's want. So those were some entertaining stories, but probably the best one I remember Lakham for was, again, as I said, two separate groups, so we would reshuffle from time to time as Rebel Command dictated that we needed to shake up our group, get different skill sets involved, and things like that. Well, one group that we picked up was a Wookiee and a brash pilot training to be a Jedi. Little stereotypical, but, it's Star Wars. It works. The stereotypes are pretty good. And, of course, we couldn't speak Wookiee. It's a kind of a difficult language to understand until you've been exposed to it a bit. So he was like, and the brash pilot was his translator, because you need somebody in the group who can speak Wookiee if you've got a Wookiee in the group, and he was the designated translator. And he's like, yeah, basically what we did, because we were kind of bragging up what we did, so, we could come to know what the others in the group were good at. So he's like, yeah, I'm a pretty good pilot and everything, and I'm learning the ways of the Force, but he's amazing. Our last mission was on this big ship with all kinds of creatures. It was basically like a zoo. I think it's actually a printed module. But we're on this huge ship, and he went toe-to-toe with a baby Sarlacc in one of the cells, and he killed it with his bare hands. Which is a true story, and not easy to do, by the way. He rolled out of his butt and I think got badly hurt in the fight, but he did it. And I, in character, completely deadpan, looked him in the eye and said, "The ability to destroy a baby Sarlacc is insignificant next to the power of the Force." Just like that. The player who I was looking at broke down, just completely disintegrated into laughter. Number one, we're always shooting for Star Wars quotes when we're playing Star Wars. It's always great to do a quote from the movie. Everybody there gets it, so, it's not like it's going over anybody's head most of the time. Ripping that famous quote from Darth Vader off and throwing it at that particular moment, everybody in the table broke down laughing. And not just a little bit either. We were belly laughing. We were gasping for breath after a moment or two. The other group wanted to know why we were laughing so hard. We just started. And we were all dying of laughter. So we choked out what had just happened, and they all started laughing because most of them either were with us and knew Lockhelm or knew the pilot and Wookiee and just busted down laughing. We had the entire basement roaring with laughter for a solid 10 minutes before anybody could talk normally. It was hilarious. Maybe it doesn't survive so well just talking about it. You kind of had to be there for the full impact, but I assure you it was great. And Lockhelm brought it to me. I don't think any other character would have been able to pull it off, or I would have been able to pull it off if I wasn't in character at the time. So those are my Star Wars memories. I had plenty of other Star Wars characters. I had the Merc Cray Brom, my very first correct Star Wars character. My very first character was actually named Stavanese Cran. He was a pirate, and the game master didn't know how the game worked, so he was thoroughly broken and unplayable. Ended up with a fleet of X-Wings and a crate of lightsabers. It was stupid. Then after that, we played Cray and had a variety of other great characters over the time, but none as memorable as those. I do remember having a character named, I think it was Action Johnson or something. He was a holovid star turned rebel because his holovid channel got turned down and he saw some atrocities, so he decided he had to fight the rebellion. He looked like an action star, but he was actually much more of just an actor. So eventually he got to be pretty cool. But yeah, I've had a number of good characters. But those three were some of my best, and I thought highlighted some of the most interesting things of those systems. So, the range of characters that you could have with the Star Wars D6, from comedy to dead serious, you could play anything in those ranges. With the Star Wars D6 or D20 system, you could do all the iconic stories. You could have all of your classic characters, and the system wasn't terrible because we know that system. It's the Dungeons and Dragons system, so it can work with some tweaking to make it Star Wars. Was it great? That's debatable. I think it was the weakest out of the lot, but it was still okay. So that's my story. Hopefully you're having a great 4th of May. May the 4th be with you. And I'm OmnusI. This ends another chapter in the Lair of OmnusI. Thank you for joining me. Until next time, farewell.